Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Alice Heiman, who's a Jersey girl at heart and now lives in the beautiful Sierra Nevada mountain community of Reno, Nevada, as do I. Her career has really traversed the country from Chicago to San Francisco until she finally settled in Reno to work for her parents at the legendary sales training company Miller Heiman. In 1997, she started her own company and is now nationally known for working with business-to-business companies that have exceptional growth potential to elevate their sales and increase their valuation. She loves spending her time strategizing with CEOs, sales and marketing and customer success leadership teams to build strategies that find new business and grow existing accounts is her passion. Welcome to the podcast, Alice.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I love how you title yourself as a Chief Sales Energizer. I think that's a great title to have, and that really is very apropos for your line of work. Love for you to give our listeners some background on your journey up to this point and what really got you passionate about sales.
Yeah, well, I didn't start in sales. And if you had asked me when I was younger if I was ever going to be in sales, of course, I would have said no. I had no idea even what sales was, except for the fact that my father was a salesman. And so he always sold for really large companies, and he sold like medical goods to big hospitals or things like that, or he sold for North American Van Lines. So he always sold for very big companies. So I knew a little bit about it, but I probably didn't really have any understanding of what he did at all. And I actually started my career as a school teacher. But my dad and his partner started their business in the late 70s when I was still in college. And I got to kind of watch that company grow and turn into what it became before it was sold. So at around, I guess 1994, my dad finally talked me into joining the company. He and his wife had purchased the company from the partner, and they were really growing it. And they wanted me to join up. So I did. I had no really idea about what selling actually was. I had been doing some projects for my dad while I was teaching, but they were mostly projects around motivating salespeople. And motivating people is something I knew how to do with my background in special education. And I also developed some games for them, which was tapping into my expertise for curriculum. So I was developing some fun games for the salespeople as they advanced, so that they could win some fun prizes and trips and things like that. But I really didn't know much about sales at that point. So I joined the company, and good thing my father wasn't expecting me to do any selling. He was expecting me to work on the curriculum and update it. And I did indeed do that. But not long after that, he figured out, oh my gosh, she can really stand up in front of adults and deliver. So I started training the trainers and running the programs, and then working with some of the largest clients that Miller Heiman had. So it was very exciting. And it was very different than teaching elementary school, special education and being a reading specialist on the one hand. On the other hand, it really tapped into all of the skills that I had learned in the 13 years that I spent as an educator, because I was very good at understanding people's behavior, human psychology, what drives people, and how to help people change their behavior, which is really what we're going for when we're working with sales leaders, sales teams. What we really want them to do is something different than they're doing now so that they get better results, right? So that was my start. I was lucky enough to work with some of the largest companies in the world: Hewlett Packard, AT&T, Coca-Cola, Dow Chemical, and Fidelity Investments. I could go on, but those were some of them that I got to work with, which was really exciting and fun. But when I started my own company, I actually started working with much smaller companies, but we can leave that a bit for later.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that information with us. You definitely helped my corporation as well with its sales strategy and approach. And I'd love to first kind of delve into those misconceptions a lot of leaders have about sales, which I think they're still pretty predominant in the regardless of the industry. And the first one that you really kind of outline and highlight is sales is not about the sellers; it's about the buyer's journey.
Yes. So this is a mindset shift for a lot of people because they have their mindset around selling as a process, right? You hire sellers and train them, and you train them, of course, on product and on the sales process that your company has. So it might start with marketing, sending out some information that helps people get to know who you are, and continues with a seller making a phone call, sending emails, using LinkedIn, going to a trade show to try to meet these people and get them to have a conversation. And then those first conversations are usually rather prescribed. They call them discovery calls. They want the sellers to walk the buyer through certain questions and determine whether they're qualified. Then they move to the next stage where they're going to be investigating further what the fit is and maybe doing proposals and things like that, and then to the next step and then to the next step until they close the deal. And then the onboarding begins, and they start using the product. So there's some sort of sales process that they want sellers to follow, and many companies have also installed some sort of sales methodology like the Miller Heiman methodology or any other that kind of helps salespeople know how to ask good questions and really help them with the details of how to move someone through that sales process. And, that does work, sort of. And back in the day when I was young, it worked pretty well because the world was a lot different. We didn't have the internet, so people couldn't gather a lot of the information on their own. And, for better or for worse, they were stuck with me as a seller if they wanted the information and if they wanted to buy something, because there really wasn't any other way. I mean, we might have sent them out a catalog or some brochures or information, but then they actually had to talk to a seller, right? And talk to me to figure out how to buy something. Well, today that's not the way it is anymore, but we still have these myths in our mind, right? We still, as CEOs, as sales leaders, we still believe that selling can be the way it used to be. But the buyers have changed. Now, I say that with this caveat: the buyer has changed, but the way human psychology works is the same. The way a buyer makes a decision is the same process as it always was. That has not changed. A human still has to go, oh, I have a problem I need to fix, or I have a challenge and I could exceed something if I could figure this out, right? So they have this big notion of, oh, there's something, right? I need something to be able to do the next thing. And then from there, they kind of narrow, right? Till they finally make a decision to either do something or not do something. And if it's do something, it's choose between the many ways they could solve for what they needed. So they have to go through that process. It could take a couple of minutes or it could take days or months, And if you put many humans together trying to make a decision, they have to all go through that same process and they have to come to consensus and make a decision. So that part hasn't really changed. But now the buyers are smarter. They have much more information available to them, and they can kind of proceed at their own pace and do it their own way. And they don't really care what your sales process is, right? They care about their journey and how they're going to buy. So we have to move away from that seller centric type of selling to a more buyer centric type of selling. And we really need sellers today who can orchestrate and guide, right? Because that's what's needed. So by the time you get to talk to someone who's interested in your solution, they've already been through a lot of discussions with their own team. They've probably looked online. They've probably talked to people and asked them, how do you solve this problem at your company? Or what would you do? Or what have you done in the past? Right. So they've gathered quite a bit. And then if they got some company names that can solve their problems, they've researched them on LinkedIn and on their websites and read all about them on the internet. So now, if you get a chance to converse with them, you really have to be in a different position. You can't just do the old BANT discovery call. BANT is we used to teach sellers, ask question about their budget, whether they have the authority to make the purchase, whether they have the need, and what their timeline is. Well, no buyer today is going to sit through you asking them those very basic questions. Look, first of all, if they're talking to you, they have some authority. And if they need what you're selling, they know they're going to have to get other people involved because no one human at any company today can purchase something that costs hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on their own. That just doesn't happen, right? They may have like a $5,000 and below budget they can do on their own, but nothing above that. So they know that they're going to have to get others involved. They may not have a budget. In fact, today in any complex sale, most companies don't really have a budget. They might have an idea of what they want to spend, but there's probably no line item in the budget for what they're buying from you, especially if it's something they've never bought before, but it's now come to their attention that this is something that could really help their company or fix a problem. So most of the time I find they need to learn the budget from you. They need to learn how much will this cost if we do this? We do it this way, right? What are the options? How much will it cost? So they're usually on a fact finding mission for the budget so they can go to someone and say, hey, we need this software, we need these tools, we need this machine, and it's going to cost about, between $20 and $50,000 or between $100,000 and $500,000. Then somebody goes, okay, let me put that in the budget, right? So we have this idea today that is very old fashioned and outdated, that people come to us knowing exactly what they want to buy, how they want to buy it, and how much they are willing to spend. And that just simply isn't true. They don't know any of those things, right? They know they have a problem that needs to be solved, and they're looking to you to help them determine whether there's a fit between what you sell and what they're trying to solve for. And if they go, oh yeah, that comes together and works really well, now we'll figure out who else we need to get involved to make this decision. What kind of budget are we going to need? How long is it going to take, to buy this and implement it? Because a lot of times people don't even know the timeline. Sometimes they like, oh, we have to solve this problem by this day. And that's great when they know that, but a lot of times they don't. So we've got to be more buyer centric, and as leaders, and even in the CEO of a company, right? We have to understand that sellers are not in charge of the buying process, and they cannot make buyers do anything in any time frame. What they can do is orchestrate and guide in a way that leads buyers to make the best decision in a timeline that makes sense for what they're trying to accomplish.
Very well said. And that really requires that paradigm shift to what the old school has told us. And like you mentioned too in the past, buyers search for the products online. They know a lot coming into that first call. And you even mentioned that a lot of times they're searching between 6 p.m. and midnight to do their research to find out what companies can offer a solution to the problem they're experiencing. And when meeting clients where they are requires us to deploy the necessary assets and tools, such as landing pages, blog articles, social media profiles that lead them along that journey, because it just can't be by happenstance or chance. We have to deliberately walk them through and help them on each step of that buyer journey.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. I always try to explain this to salespeople. I look at them and I say, look at yourself, your boss, your CEO. When do they have time to thoroughly research something that they want to buy? The middle of the day? No. They're bombarded with phone calls and people and Slack and Teams and every other email. They're bombarded. They don't have time, right? They barely get time to eat. So people are looking and learning late at night, and it is usually between 9 p.m. and midnight, right? And you want to sell to these people, but they're on your site at a time when there's nobody available, depending on time zones and such, right? So you don't have what they need on your site. So it's extremely frustrating for those who are trying to buy from you. They can't do a demo unless they fill out a form and sign up and get an appointment. What? You can demo the basics of your program, your product, your software. It's not going to be in depth. It's not going to be customized, but they can get the gist of it. Put that on your website. you could have a human chatbot, not an idiot chatbot. I've talked to a lot of those lately, but you could have a real human on your chat 24/7. So if someone shows up there at midnight, or whatever time zone it is, it's not when you're available. That chatbot can get them to a certain point and at least get them interested enough to have a conversation with somebody who can take them the rest of the way. You can just do a better job of explaining what your product does, right? I mean, it's great when we put up our websites and we all think they're so good, but have you tested them with your customers? Can they figure out what you do? So, knowing that the buyers are busy, they have a lot of responsibility. They have their own job. Plus, now they're trying to help buy this. They have a committee they have to work with, and they don't have time in the middle of the day to do the research they need. So, thinking about meeting your customer where they are, right? Just like you said, meet the customer where they are. And if they're on your website between 9 and midnight, then you better be there with something that can help them be curious enough to want to then get on the phone with someone.
Couldn't agree with you more on that one. Another misconception that I see happening a lot happened, I mean, personally as well, is that when a company starts, it's common to have a leader, the CEO, to do the sales work. They feel like that's their responsibility. They can do it better than anyone else. They don't want to give it away. But if they're going to build that organization, they have to build a sales organization in which they delegate the day to day sales as fast as possible. Otherwise, it's not going to be as successful long term. What are your thoughts on how that CEO, what's that time frame, and kind of what's that process look like?
So you've probably heard me say this before, and I it's all over the internet. But the CEO will always have a role in sales. That role changes as the company matures. So if you're in the beginning, yes, founder led sales is great. You and your co founder should be doing the selling, but that just simply won't scale. And every investor in the world knows that, and every leader knows that. So you can continue to grow doing all the sales yourself as the founder. And I know companies who have done quite well that way, but it won't scale. So if you need to scale, that means you've got to grow quickly, very quickly, and you need that hockey stick, right? Then you have to build a sales organization. Now, there's a lot of mistakes made this early in hiring sales people and in building a sales organization. And in the early stages, I see lots of mistakes. The biggest one is that we think, as the founder, that we can just hire salespeople who will sell as well as we do, who will be able to get through to people the way that we can, and who will have that drive and that enthusiasm that we have. And that simply just isn't real, right? So, founders, yeah, entrepreneurs have this entrepreneurial enthusiasm. They also have the title of founder and CEO or founder and COO. And they know their product and the results it can bring inside and out. So they are perfectly prepared, right, to make a sale. Now, sometimes they have pretty poor sales skills, so they irritate people or are a little too pushy or they do things, not great. But most of the time, most founders are really good at sales because they're inquisitive, they're curious, and they want to learn from people. Plus, they have all of those things I just mentioned, the entrepreneurial enthusiasm, the knowledge of the product, and the title. So, knowing all of that, the first hires you make might not be people who go out and perform the entire sales process. You might still be involved in the sales process in some portion. So you might first hire people who can help set appointments for you. And a lot of times in the early days, I like people to outsource that. That's a better way than trying to build your own prospecting team. People call them SDRs, sales development reps, or BDRs, business development reps. But that's hard to build that. So I suggest outsourcing that if you need someone to do the prospecting and set appointments for you. But that would be something I would take off my plate faster than the entire sales process, for example. Or if you are a CEO who has a wide network and a great advisory board that can really help open the doors for you, and you have lots of introductions and have lots of conversations, but following up on them is what's hard. Then perhaps you need to hire uh, a sales coordinator or sales assistant who will make sure that they manage all of the follow up and details so that all you have to do is prep for these meetings and show up. That might be better. And also in the beginning, a lot of times the founder can manage to do all of the sales meetings that need to be done. But what they can't manage is then onboarding the customers and helping them be successful. So, customer success might be one of the first hires that you do rather than, a full cycle seller, right? Somebody who goes from prospect to close. So, it really depends on what you're selling, who you're selling it to, what the volume is, what the average sale size is. All of those things make a difference. But I think the founder should stay involved through the first year for sure, and maybe longer, but playing a different role as they bring people on. There's no one better than the founder to stay in touch with the customers and really hear from them what they need and what they want. And especially once they've started using whatever you sold them, right? To help them become highly successful by understanding what's missing, right? Or what could work a little bit better. So in those early days, you really have to stay in it. When you do make your first sales hire, it's difficult because sometimes we think, let's get a seller like from some big company who's really well trained and they know how to sell really well, and they'll just come in here and knock it out. Well, sellers from big companies are used to having lots of support and lots of resources. You bring them into a startup, they don't know how to be scrappy and do it themselves, and there's no one else to do it. So they're not very successful. So you really have to find very entrepreneurial salespeople early on, people who just will figure it out, can go do it themselves, don't wait around for someone else to do it for them. They just keep moving, right? So you've got to find those kinds of sellers. And then you have to make sure that you're ready to manage them. And as a CEO founder, maybe the inventor of, the product, you may not have any skills for managing people, period, but you may not have any skills for managing salespeople, which is very different. And yes, you can learn as you go, no doubt, but you need a plan for managing these people you're going to hire because they have got to work a process, keep a calendar. They have to prospect. They have to do the right activities right in order for you to get what you want. And you've got to train them, not just on the product and on your company, but they've got to be trained on who they're selling to, what's a day in their life like, and of course, really understand the ins and outs of the product so they understand what kind of results the product can bring. And they need to shadow you and watch you do it. They won't do it the same exact way, but they need that experience, right? So there's a lot to it. And most founders hire salespeople and then they haven't spent enough time before they hire them to prepare, right? To prepare to manage them, to prepare to train them, to have documentation that will help them. And then they don't spend enough time training them either. So, sometimes it works out just because it does. Most times we cycle through a lot of salespeople as founders before we learn how to really hire right for our specific situation and for our customer base, right? So, yeah, definitely want to hire salespeople so you can scale. One other tip I'll give you when you're hiring in those early stages is always hire two sellers at a time, two customer success, two sales development reps. Hire two at a time. Easier, right? You're going to got to stop and train them anyway. May as well train two of them. And then you can benchmark them against each other and see who excels. And then you can build your ideal candidate profile based on the one that excelled before you hire more.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.